Hello everyone. Um, just cooking myself up a nice lunch. My head may kind of pop in and out of frame here because I didn't exactly have a great place to put it, so it's kind of cantilevered on the stove. That is my phone. So I'm just cooking myself some lunch and went into work this morning. It was great. Nice little morning shift. Great people as usual. During it, I did get asked a question because a old associate of mine came up and he mentioned, I heard that you can talk about any topic at length, right? And the two he chose were pretty fun. Now, he didn't actually want to talk about them, but I figure I'll use them as prompts. One of which, fitting because I'm cooking, and the other, just, what's going on in the world. Excuse me, I'm still not so good at this whole talking to a camera thing. Trying to figure out pacing and all that still. Which one to start with? We'll start with the morality one. So, one of the two he posed, because the other one I can kind of use to springboard for some other questions that you folks have asked via the send it and whatnot. So the question was, what is the morality of stealing bread, right? And, it's a common question, it's a common train of thought, under what circumstances is it justified to steal bread? From what places, for what purposes? But keeping it true and simple, I just asked, where are they stealing it from? Because truth be told, if you're trying to feed a family, right, and you're so desperate that you're willing to go to theft, which that's a crime, you're willing to commit a crime to, help out those you love, power to you, go to Walmart and steal bread. I don't think that's in any way communistic, anarchist. I think that's, you do what you have to do to survive, what you doing, Bella? Sorry, one of my dogs. Hi. Oh, hello. Have you come to help me cook? Oh, here's Babby. Babby, come here. You say hi. This is Babby. Oh, big puppy stretch? Okay. All right, go lie down. Go. Where was I? Right. I don't think in any way that's really, criminal thought to advocate for. Where was I going to go with this? You distracted me. That's what you did. Yeah. Go lie down. Thank you. I will say, there's a lot of belief within the United States of this kind of bootstrap mentality that you should be able to pull yourself up real easy. And I remember during the COVID years, there was a millionaire who decided, I'm going to try this whole homeless thing. And, because he thought that in a year's time, he could be a millionaire again. 8 months in, he was still broke, working a $38,000 a year job. And his weight was dropping, his health had gone through the toilet. So not easy to be poor, And it's great that there is systems here in the United States, both private and public, for helping those in less fortunate situations. But there's still this underlying bootstrap mentality. And truthfully, I don't see in any way how stealing bread for your family is not part of that. If that's something that you have to do to get day to day, steal bread. Steal bread. Now, the one thing that he did was, he said, not a store. They're not stealing it from a store. He wanted to spice up the scenario. He says, from a small business. Now, small business is a pretty wide range of businesses, because we could be talking small as in a local chain, we could be talking small as in a family business. What are we defining as small? It's an idea in a lot of Marxist thought, specifically, of the petite bourgeoisie, small business owners, small elite. And the question comes down to, is it a family-owned bakery or is it a local chain bakery? Because that does create a degree of separation. I'm not advocating, again, none of this is advocating that you do steal. But if your scenario is really so bad that you have to, I'm not going to judge you for doing it. I'm not going to lark on you for picking up a thing of Wonder Bread. And it kind of all loops back again to, how small is this business and how desperate is the person? Is the person stealing it just because they're, wanting a snack, or are they stealing it because they're so desperately hungry, or they need to, so desperately take care of someone else in their life that they have no better alternative, you know. And obviously, food pantries are great, food banks are great, but they're not a cure-all. They really aren't. Excuse me for a second while I find the salt. I should have done this. I should have done this before I started cooking. Whew. Salty as the sea, even though it doesn't actually really affect it. One little piece of pasta advice. Where did I put the box? Oh. One little piece of pasta advice is that when you're making pasta, you don't want to stir it too much, because the more you stir it, the more you agitate the starches in it. That's why sometimes if you're making a nice pot of mac and cheese or something, you'll get that foam that keeps rising up. It's probably because you've stirred it too much. You've activated the starch too much. I'm not struggling to rip open a box. I just didn't tear cleanly. There's a difference. There we go. It's just blue box. Where was I? Right. You know, the systems that we do have here in the U.S. to help the hungry, to help the downtrodden, they're not really effective cures, mostly because they're designed to just bounce people place to place. You know, the ongoing homelessness crisis, the ongoing, you know, poverty crisis, the systems that we do have aren't effective in helping it. You know, and certainly there's ways that we could look to fix the problem. You know, government-aided work programs, that's a massive thing that we used to do. The Civilian Conservation Corps, that's what that used to do. I know the Climate Conservation Corps, which is now a thing. I'm going to turn this down a little. Also did for a while. Get some smoke wisping in. But the thing is, you're not going to find a government that's willing to go that far. And relatively speaking, unemployment is still low enough that it's not justifiable. You know, we're talking Great Deal Depression, you know, Great Depression, New Deal solutions for a problem that's minuscule in comparison, relatively speaking. So again, the problem with that whole conundrum is how have they been failed, or how has society failed them to this point that they're stealing the bread from either a family-run store, a local chain, or an international chain? You know, are they stealing it from a Walmart, from a mom and pop, or from Mr. Bready's local bread? You know, the context changes it. But at the end of the day, if they're so desperate they're stealing bread for probably the good reason, you know, because you would think you would steal something a little more valuable otherwise. So, 2 cents, steal bread if you're hungry. If you're that desperate, or if someone in your life needs it that bad, steal a fucking loaf of Wonder Bread. I'm not going to judge I'm not going to narc on you. Jesus Christ, I forgot that this is a good pot too. I've still got plenty of time because I like my pasta a little overdone. You can yell at me all you want for that. So the other thing he mentioned, jokingly, but I'm going to take it and run with it, was Iran. What's the situation over there? What's my thoughts on it? The current situation, it's, how do I put this? Imagine that you have a very aggressive neighbor. They throw a rock at you, right? Now, you already don't like each other. You haven't liked each other since day one. Do you either A, tell them to go bugger off, or do you throw the rock back? In this case, they threw a rock back, and now the neighbor is acting like the victim, which is not new for them. You know, look, I have nothing against Jewish people. I have nothing against them. Israelis, though, it's such an ethno-state. It's a South African-style ethno-state. They have their own apartheid there. You know, why did they have to level all of Gaza to root out this terrorist threat, right? But meanwhile, they're doing precision strikes in Iran. I'm not saying that they're not very different problems. I'm saying you showed us that you can do clean military operations, and yet you still chose cruelty against people in your backyard. I can't, in good consciousness, say that I support the Israeli state. I don't. You know, I wish the best for everyone. I don't want death. I don't advocate for death. And I certainly don't advocate for Hamas. But the suffering of the Palestinian people, there's no words that justify it. You know, Zionism in all forms is a wretched disease. You know, it's great to have pride in your religion. It's great to have pride in your ethnicity, your nationality, what have you not. But it should not be to the point where it's to the detriment of other people, because at that point, it's unjustifiable. But the thing with Iran and Israel is they've always been hostile to each other. You've got a Jewish minority state, and you've got a Muslim majority state. It's not surprising to see that they would conflict with one another, especially considering Israel's, how to put this, history of meddling in the Middle East. You know, and the complexities of it come from, how does the U.S. want to continue approaching Israel? Are we going to continue propping them up? Are we going to continue arming them with bombs, fighter planes, what have you not? Or are we going to step away and say, look, we've given you enough. You started this fight, your fight. And frankly, I hope that Thomas Massey's bill, at least for the House, does see some success. It's not our war to fight. You know, by all means, usually I am an interventionist. I do think that there is fair game for American involvement in foreign war. You know, like our supplying of weapons to the Ukrainians. But there's no justification for continuing to arm Israel. They have proven what they do with it, and I don't think anyone who advocates for that can sleep with a clean conscience. I really don't. You know, so it's not our place to fight in Iran again. George W. Bush once turned down an Israeli invitation to go to war with Iran again. There's no reason for us to go back. That place was a death trap, all right? The people we may not have lost many lives on the ground, but the soldiers' suicides after the fact, after those wars, and the fact that we don't support those people, there's no saying, oh, we'll get it right this time, because we won't. We don't change. We don't want to change, because change requires the energy to do so, and people don't have it. Legislators don't have it. They'll scream against a wall, they'll get their soundbite, but they won't actually advocate for it. Or if they do, it'll be too little too late. So it's not our place to fight in the Middle East again. But stepping away from that rather depressing spiel, I did want to talk about one of my more, favorite personal stories, not personal, one of my personal favorite stories from Iran, but because of a comment that requested I ramble about, the World War II era or the Cold War era, we're going to talk Cold War. Now, why Cold War, right? Why not World War II? Because I seem like the type of guy who would definitely be a big World War II guy. And to some degree, I like World War II, but the thing is, when you hear World War II guy, you either end up with someone who actually does understand the history and is intrigued by it, or a guy who's trying to LARP as Hitler. There's rarely an in-between, and more often than not, you see the latter over the former. That's not bad. I need to get the milk out. So, the Iranian hostage crisis, which I know, hell of a transition here, happened at the tail end of Jimmy Carter's first term, right? Or, well, only term. He didn't win re-election, regrettably. Now, you may be positing the question, okay, what does Jimmy Carter have to do with Iran? And as aforementioned, the whole big deal, what's referred to as an October surprise, at the end of his presidency, in the run-up to the presidential campaign, was the Iranian hostage crisis. Outside of the oil crisis, it was all you would hear about. Now, how does this loop in to being an interesting story, right? Because everyone knows the basic outline. He tries to send in a rescue operation with Operation Eagle Claw. That regrettably fails just because we hadn't tried anything of that degree with modern technologies. And I did have the pleasure of speaking with one of the pilots from that mission, and he held nothing against Carter at all. But he did, interestingly enough, hold a lot against Ronald Reagan. Now, what does Ronald Reagan have to do with this, right? Outside of being Jimmy Carter's competitor in the 1980 election. Believe it or not, more than you would think, right? Because one of his campaign staffers mysteriously starts vacationing in Iran, right? Right as the hostage crisis starts. There's Americans stuck in Tehran, and an American is choosing to visit Iran, or Iran, excuse me. Man, let's got like a minute more. Excuse me. So, the question comes down to it. Why was one of his campaign managers going to Iran, right? Which I will say, I'm going to flip back and forth. I did learn the proper pronunciation is Iran and not Iran. The Iran pronunciation is largely what's referred to as a Bushism, so a George W. era mispronunciation, right? Iran, Iraq is how you say it, but we say it Iran, Iraq, plus nuclear versus nuclear. A lot of that comes down to Bushisms that have just kind of permeated our culture here in the United States. But, where was I? This is the fun part. I get to just ramble at you, and you guys either listen to it as like background noise, which I love that for you. I'm happy if someone wants me to like read a book or something, let me know, and I'm willing to do it. I think that'd actually be pretty funny. Right about there. But anyhow, the thing is, Carter kept trying diplomacy, right? Much to his credit. That's what he was great at. He was a fantastic diplomat, right? But the thing is, the Iranians keep turning him down because we still had the Shah of Iran. Now, eventually, Shah of Iran passes away, right? For context, we had put him in as a rump monarch in 1947, 48, something like that. It might have been the 50s. It was sometime post-war that we propped up the Shah's government. Oh, that's perfect. Sorry. Anyhow, Shah of Iran eventually dies of cancer while we still have him here in the U.S. So the Iranians don't get what they want, which is his head. Instead, he's buried here in the U.S., as far as memory serves. So why were these negotiations failing? Well, there was a journalist who was beginning to pick up on some things. Sadly, the story didn't breach large enough for it because obviously the fact that the hostage crisis was happening was way bigger news. So the question becomes, again, why was one of Ronald Reagan's campaign advisors there? Now, if you don't know anything about the Reagan administration, there was a period of time called the Iran-Contra affair. Now, Iran-Contra was, what we did was we sold missiles to the Iranians. That was General Oliver North who did that, in order to fund Nicaraguan, which I can't say right. I can't. It's like how I say library instead of library. Anyhow, to fund the Contras, which were fighting the communist Sanitas, it's something like that. I think Sonata might be a car, but Sandistas. I think that's right, Sandistas. You'll have to mind me, I'm going off memory here, which is always a terrible idea. Oh, nuts. Okay. Anyhow, the thing is, to do that, you would have already kind of needed to set up the infrastructure to get those weapons over to Iran without raising suspicion. Because this whole thing was technically treason. In no way should Ronald Reagan, Oliver North, or anyone have been doing this. Turbo, super illegal. But they did it anyways, which was normal for Reagan. So the thing is, Reagan's campaign manager, his trips to Iran seemed to point that he had been organizing this deal years in advance, right? Or at least some type of weapons back deal. The popular belief is that it was okay, look, end the hostage crisis. When I get into office, when I get there, I will sell you weapons, which we did. We supplied massive amounts of weapons to multiple countries in the Middle East. And the reason that this may sound strange is it does sound like a conspiracy theory, right? It really easily does. I mean, its name is literally October Surprise Theory. But between Carter not being able to seemingly make any headway with the Iranians, Reagan mysteriously being great with them, and his campaign manager constantly traveling there, it lines up perfectly. But the thing that sells the deal, outside of some fantastic books that have been written on it since, was when the hostages were released, because a few of them did come home earlier than the others. However, if you didn't know this, the Iranian hostage crisis ended 15 minutes, that's it, after Ronald Reagan was sworn in. Jimmy Carter lost quite badly against Ronald Reagan, right? And the thing with Ronald Reagan was he had been itching for the presidency since 1976, really, 1972, kind of, 1976, definitely, because he tried to primary Gerald Ford, who was then Nixon's VP, not really, Nick, kind of, again, convoluted, because Spiro Agnew resigned from the office and then he was replaced with Gerald Ford. Then Nixon resigned, so then Gerald Ford came in, and then technically Gerald Ford became the only president to not be elected by the American people. But then he lost the election of 1976 against Jimmy Carter, because the 1976 RNC, Ronald Reagan did challenge him for the nomination unsuccessfully, and yeah, they lost to Jimmy Carter, which, hey, credit to Carter, way to go. Mostly because he played as an outsider candidate, which people really liked. Mostly because of the Nixon era corruption. Where was I? See, this is the problem. I get on a rambling spiel and then I lose it. And we're 20 minutes deep, which is great. You know, I'm not even going to edit this down. This is just going to be released as is. Oh, that was a noise. But yeah. So Carter loses badly, right? Ronald Reagan goes on to win in 1984 as well. His vice president, George H.W. Bush, ends up going to win in 1988 with the funniest vice president of all time. Look up Dan Quayle potato spelling. You'll thank me later. Where was I going with this? I was going somewhere with this. So the thing is, Carter had at least a minuscule shot of winning re-election up to the point of the Iranian hostage crisis. The OPEC oil crisis and the gas price surge had been pretty terrible for him. But the thing is, and I've had the pleasure of speaking to people who remember it, everyone talked about Iran, right? That was the big deal. How's the Iranian hostage crisis going? What's the updates? Has Carter done anything? The negotiations failed again? What's Carter doing? Why aren't our boys home, right? And Reagan was very easily able to sit on that, and he was able to say, I promise I'll bring your boys home. I'll make sure of it. And that Jimmy Carter does not allow your boys to suffer. Now, one thing that very much contributed to this was in 1972, there had been a large-scale conspiracy that a bunch of missing in war POWs had been left behind by the government in Vietnam. Not true. But being able to kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Latch on to that same kind of intrigue for conspiracy, except pivot towards people you knew were stuck in a country. It very much, lionizes people. That's the word I'm looking for. You know, to say, hey, why hasn't Carter brought our boys home? 444 days? Why is it taking him so long? Now, it was mostly taking him so long because, again, Reagan's campaign advisors were going to Iran, making backdoor deals, technically in violation of the Logan Act, which is another act of treason, to fuck over Carter. And he did. He fucked him over greatly. You know, and it's funny because when I asked the Operation Eagle Claw pilot his opinion on the matter, I asked, do you think Reagan, and he cuts me off, and he goes, didn't do a thing, did not help at all, right? He deserves no credit for it, right? And I asked him, well, what's your opinion on Carter? Do you think that, you know, and he goes, Carter did everything he could. And hearing that from that man specifically just kind of further reinforced it. Plus, there's a very fantastic book, Den of Spies. I would recommend it if you want to learn more about this topic. So, you know, I hope that was kind of an interesting Cold War story, even though it was me rambling for probably 10, 15 minutes about a litany of things. But also, if you want another great book, Outlier by Kai Bird is about Jimmy Carter. And then there's also Reaganland, which I'm slowly working my way through. So yeah, that's the recommended reading for this. And I'm going to enjoy some mac and cheese.